change, the so-called fifth assessment, underscored the severe threats posed by climate change. Now, we know this because the report's findings were leaked ahead of the carefully planned schedule. And of course, the fifth assessment is not yet final. But we do know that many of its draft conclusions are associated with its forecasts of sea level rises as high as 3 feet by the end of the century. The draft report ascribes a 95% probability to human activity as the principal driver. And if you understand how scientists use probability estimates, you understand how powerful that is. The empirical evidence of climate change continues to mount. Rising temperatures, here we are on a mid-90-degree day in mid-September in Washington. Fires and more intense storms are posing serious threats to our communities and to our energy infrastructure. A case in point, California recently declared a state of emergency for San Francisco as forest fires more than 100 miles away threaten the power lines that provide the city with its electricity. Of course, Superstorm Sandy was a wake-up call for many Americans, especially those in the storm's path. My wife and I live in the Boston area. We were without power for almost a week, and we were not in the direct line of that storm. By the time that storm had hit New Jersey and New York, Sandy had been downgraded to a Category 1 hurricane, a tropical cyclone with hurricane force winds. But it still rendered extraordinary damage and the loss of life, livelihoods, and infrastructure. What may be less broadly understood is that sea level rise was a significant factor in the storm surge that was so devastating at landfall. The sea level in New York Harbor is now a foot higher than it was 100 years ago. And that factor came into devastating play. We can imagine the consequences of a rise of an additional 3 feet, as the IPCC is projecting as a possibility. And also in the vein of what isn't fully understood, that in addition to the extensive electricity power outages, which we're very familiar with, it's not widely appreciated that the storm severely disrupted East Coast fuel networks, causing heavy damage to 2 East Coast refineries and shutting down, due to electric power losses and water damage, more than 40 New York Harbor terminals. Sandy was a single extreme weather event. In the last 10 years, the U.S. has been hit by 9 of the 10 most expensive hurricanes in its history, costing our communities a cumulative amount of $320 billion. So at the Department of Energy, we are increasingly focused on the climate-related toll on the health and reliability of our energy infrastructure. In July, we released a report detailing these actual and potential impacts. And let me give you a short list of what we found. The Gulf of Mexico produces 50% of U.S. crude oil and natural gas for the country. And just as a footnote, both of my daughters, who are in their early 20s, now live in New Orleans, so I'm especially focused on the vulnerability of that region, as many of us have been since Hurricane Rita. So the Gulf produces 50% of the U.S. crude oil and natural gas across the country and contains nearly half of the total U.S. refining capacity. Rising sea level and storm surges could cost these industries $8 billion a year by the year 2030. Secondly, power